My name is Stephanie Carroll and I write historical women's fiction. I've written a novel called A White Room, which I am currently seeking a publisher and agent for. Today I thought I would do a book review of The Time Traveler's Wife, which is my absolute #1 top favorite book of all time. It's the only book I've ever read more than once, and I'm actually on my 3rd read because it's just so good. Oh my gosh, I love this book. It's by Audrey Neffenger, and it has been made into a movie, which I actually thought was a pretty good movie. I saw it before I read the book, and I think it only got like 2 or 3 stars, but usually that's what happens when a movie is made from a book, because the movie is not as good as the book in comparison. No offense, I like the movie. But I think it's worth more than 2 stars. I think it was like a 3 or 4 star movie, in my opinion. So it's a national bestseller, and Audrey Neffenger is actually a professor in the MFA program at the Columbia College Chicago Center for Book and Paper Arts. And she lives in Chicago, and this is her first novel. I'm going to read the back, which has sort of a little summary. A most untraditional love story. This is the celebrated tale of Henry D. Tamble, a dashing, adventuresome librarian who involuntarily travels through time, and Claire Abshire, an artist whose life takes a natural sequential course. Henry and Claire's passionate affair endures across a sea of time and captures them in an impossibly romantic trap that tests the strengths of fate and basks in the bonds of love. So basically, it's about this guy, Henry, who, for reasons he doesn't know, time travels. He is not an inventor. He did not come up with a machine. He doesn't drink a potion, nothing. He just disappears and reappears in another time and place. And the fact that he does this is actually a really interesting experience, that there's a lot of detail, because the whole book, involves this thing that happens to him. He can't take clothes or anything with him, and he can't control it. He has absolutely no control over it. Also, it seems to be encouraged by certain physical things, like bright lights, and drinking alcohol will make it happen more. At the same time, he finds out through the course of the book that certain drugs make it happen less. So he's playing around with things like that, like certain, I think like Valium, for example, is one of the things that makes it happen less. So of course he dabbles with that and has issues, self-medicating, things like that. And like I said, he has no control over it, so he can't decide when he time travels. And once he's time traveled, he shows up naked, no money, no ID, no explanation for how he got there. And he can't control how to get back. And he never knows where he's at or where he's going to appear. And sometimes he does appear in the worst places, like in the middle of a freeway or right in front of somebody that he knows, and then he has to explain, what in the world's happening. I really love the way that Audrey Neffenger deals with time travel. It's so different than the way you've seen it in sci-fi, because it's almost like it's like if time travel was real. If it could really happen, how would it happen? And if you guys know anything about the type of books that I write and that I love, that's something that always gets me. Like M. Night Shyamalan, love his stuff, because it's always taking a supernatural thing and making it, if it could really happen, how would it go down? Anyways, so, he has to deal with things that would inevitably happen if you really did time travel, like showing up in front of somebody and having to explain to them. And he does, in the book, have to explain to people how this is happening to him. And, they actually physically watch him disappear or appear, and so they believe him. And it's just a very, very interesting way to deal with it. So I love Henry's character. I love him as a time traveler, and I love him as a person. He is kind of like this grungy, he's not always grungy, but in the beginning he's grungy and kind of like messed up guy. He's had a hard life because of this whole time travel thing. And he, has had to do hard things to deal with it. And he's but at the same time, he's like a really smart guy. He has a high level degree. I think he has a master's or maybe even a doctorate in the book. And he, works with all these historical books in a library. And he's like kind of like a curator type person. That's not what he is. He has some special term, but it's like a scientist type librarian person. And so he's actually like a really smart guy, but he is in a way also simultaneously this grungy criminal type, because he's always finding himself in these situations where he shows up in the middle of nowhere naked, and he doesn't want to have to explain to people how he got there and what's happening, because half the time they don't believe him, throw him in jail until he disappears again. So he has to steal things. He has to steal food and clothes, and he has to, and he's always, every time it happens, it's not as easy as like, well, curl up in a ball and wait until you go back. No, because every time he time travels, it gives him like a severe headache, and he's starving, and, he's compelled by physical things to find clothing, to find shelter, to find food. And also, he shows up in like freezing cold places sometimes, and you can't just curl up in a ball in the snow and wait until it goes away. So his character's awesome, love him. Then the whole deal with the story is that he meets a girl who he's never met before, but she knows him because apparently he had been time traveling to visit her when she was a little girl, and as she grew up from like 5 years old to 18 years old. He visited her, time traveling, over and over and over, and they fell in love. So the whole book is this amazing thing where you're seeing all these different time periods, and the book does not go in order necessarily, but it does. It has a sequence that you can follow, but at the same time, it's like all different times and zones, and you're seeing from these two people's perspective, Henry and the woman he falls in love with, Claire, and you're seeing how Henry meets her, and it's like the first time he's ever seen her, but then you get to see scenes where it's when she's a child, and it's the first time he meets her as a child, and it's the first time she's met him, and it's just awesome. I mean, the craft and the technique that the author put into this book is just amazing. Like, I don't know how she did it, how she kept it organized. And she did. And she not only kept it organized in this like detached back and forth manner, but you as a reader can keep it straight while you're reading it easily. I also love Claire, the main female character, obviously time traveler's wife. I love her because she's this really interesting person, and she's an artist, and she's a weird, unique artist. She makes paper sculptures, and so part of her art is making paper, which I never even really thought about as anything, let alone art. And it's really cool the way that the author goes into descriptions about it and how she does it and things she makes. But one of the things that I absolutely love about Claire is her experiences with Henry disappearing. And the thing about Henry disappearing is that sometimes he disappears for weeks and months on end because he can't control where he goes and when he comes back. And so she has a lot of experiences that I relate to as a Navy wife. My husband goes away for long periods of time, months, and sometimes months at a time, and then sometimes 8 months at a time. So I think that's one of the reasons why I'm probably absolutely in love with this book, is that I relate to it so much. And I really highly recommend it for anybody who is a military spouse, because you will just relate to it a lot. And the experiences that they go through are everyday life experiences. Like, the book is about life. It's about what you do as a married couple, when you find love. Another thing that I absolutely love about this book is that I love it when people take the subject of falling in love, finding the person you are in love with, but then taking it on a realistic, then what happens, as opposed to living happily ever after. Because it's not that simple, and we all know that. But there is such a thing as people living happily. You know, people stay married their entire lives. And this book takes us through that. And you would think, well, the reason it always ends with that happily ever after thing is because real life isn't a story. Real life, you know, you don't want to read about it. This book, you do. You read about real life, you feel like you're living their lives. And it is so intriguing and fun and interesting, and it's amazing. Like, I want to write like this author. I absolutely love her. She's amazing. I want to be able to write people's lives like that. I mean, these are like real people with real lives, and you get to experience them. It's awesome. It is so good. The other thing I really, really love about this book is that it's set sort of in the 90s. They come up, you know, to modern times as they get older and stuff, but it's a big chunk of it is set in the 90s. And you don't... more and more movies and books are starting to be set in the 90s, but it's kind of like one of those first books that I read that was set in the 90s, and I grew up in the 90s, so that was a lot of fun for me, reading about grunge and different things. So I really like that. Anyways, that is my 5, 6, 7, 8, 10-star review for The Time Traveler's Wife. I highly recommend that you get it. Or at least, you know, take a look at it. And all my praise to the author, Audrey Neffinger. Love her. Love her stuff. Well, I hope you enjoyed this book review and that it was insightful. If you'd like to learn more about me and my fiction, you can at www.stephaniecarroll.net. You can also find me on various social media sites at Carroll Books on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Goodreads, Tumblr, Pinterest, etc. And check out my other blogs and watch for my blogs. I post them every weekend, and I post blogs every Wednesday. Thank you.